take their seats, we're going to get started with our next panel, which is entitled Bridging the Digital Divide, Aligning BEAD and USF for Universal Broadband Access. My name is Christopher Shipley. I'm the Executive Director of Public Policy for INCOMPAS. And I have an esteemed group of panelists up here to talk about the next phase of the BEAD program. To my immediate right, I have Veneeth Iyengar from ConnectLA, the Executive Director. To his right, I have Ryan Thompson, a Senior Associate at Hogan Lovells. To Ryan's right, I have Carl Guardino, the Vice President of Government Affairs and Policy at Tarana. And then to his right is Chris Champion, the Vice President of Government Relations for Spire. It has been an interesting week and a half, I think, with respect to the BEAD program. And I think one of the big questions with the new administration was, what would the future of BEAD look like? You know, when it was passed into law in 2021, as we currently know it, the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program really represented a once-in-a-generation federal investment in broadband infrastructure, and really a tremendous opportunity for the competitive community and for states to determine how to allocate resources to reach unserved and underserved communities, those pockets of consumers that need broadband access to engage in a digital future. And before we jump into what the future of the program is going to look like, what the last 7 to 10 days have told us about the program, I think it's really important to reiterate something that the chair of our board, Mike Galvin from Granite, said earlier today, which is that we've reached a point with the BEAD program where the states are they are well seated at this point to implement the program, have done some considerable thinking and planning around the program. And so I want to start with Veneeth from a state broadband office in ConnectLA. Veneeth, Louisiana is well known as being at the very cutting edge of this program. You all are the leaders. Your final approval, I think, is already on the table. It's already gone through NTIA. And so, Veneeth, walk us through where Louisiana is right now. What milestones have you achieved with respect to the BEAD program? And where do things stand in terms of some of your deployment timelines?
Really appreciate the folks at INCOMPAS. Really appreciate Chip and you and for convening this meeting. It's pretty appropriate, especially after last week's hearing in terms of what's happening and with the future BEAD. Look, as a state office, we've always appreciated the sense of urgency in Louisiana to drive results to constituents on a daily basis. Our litmus test as a state is judged by how many people have we impacted or how many people's problems have we solved that day. Senator Moran has talked about having visited every county and making it a purposeful effort to do that. We have, as an office, personally have visited over 120 cities, towns, and villages all throughout Louisiana. And so everything that we do is hyper undergirded by, are we effectively solving that individual's problems? And if we are, how are we doing it? And if we're not, how do we constantly process, improve our grant programs over the last couple of years to quickly execute? And so that's why we've always worked with a sense of urgency. And to be fair, a lot of states are working with a sense of urgency. I'm happy to have my colleague, Mike Sanders, who does a fantastic job running the Oklahoma broadband office, who I'm envious of because he has a groundbreaking every other day, okay? And for people to see is to believe. When people start to see the work is happening, then that's a big deal. And so we have run a hyper-competitive process, a free market process. We ran a process under largely Governor Landry's vision and leadership to drive access to rural Louisiana as quickly and efficiently as possible. In this first 100 days of his administration last year, we had a meeting and he said, Veneeth, how do we continually process, improve? How do we create a free market process to really drive as much infrastructure in Louisiana as possible? Why is infrastructure important in Louisiana? I'll tell you why. It's important everywhere. It's hyper important in Louisiana because in a couple of months, hurricane season starts in June. Hurricane season no longer ends in October. It's really, hurricane season, I think, ends after Thanksgiving. The waters are unfortunately getting warmer, right? That's why people all go to the south when it gets to wintertime, right? And so from our perspective, the governor is really focused on making sure that whatever infrastructure we invest in, we knock it out at once so we don't have to ever deal with broadband issues for the rest of our life. A. Second, that whatever we do is such that we invest in this infrastructure that's resilient, which is why over 90% of the infrastructure for BEAD is going to be buried underground in Louisiana, all throughout Louisiana. And the last thing is this: the free market is really important. It's critically important to the governor. And as part of the free market, we ran a process which reduced a lot of the administrative burden to applying. And we had a free market process that effectively strung out a lot of the inefficiencies in these competitive grants, resulting in what we've achieved, which is getting high-speed internet as efficiently as possible, that's cost efficient, but most importantly, achieving universal coverage. And so those are really the three big tenets. Now, where we are in our office, look, we absolutely believe in the reforms that Congress is pushing through this BEAD Act. We think it's a great start. We also believe in a lot of the process improvement that's going to occur through Secretary Lutnick's administration when it comes to the BEAD program. In fact, 2 months ago, and I don't know if you all had seen this, but 2 months ago, Governor Landry, on January 22nd, so 2 days after President Trump officially was sworn in, sent a letter to Secretary Lutnick outlining all the possibility of BEAD reform that will actually help to put shovels in the ground faster. And one of the things that Governor Landry said in Louisiana in his letter was that in Louisiana, we're prepared in the first 100 days of President Trump's administration to actually put shovels in the ground. So we have a number of sub-grant agreements ready to go. We have companies that are excited to build. 70% of our dollars are going to Louisiana companies, big and small. Many of them could be your members here at INCOMPAS. And so we're just excited, waiting for that green light from Commerce to give us the green light on our NIST approval, and then we'll put shovels in the ground.
Sounds great. Thank you, Veneeth. And I am, speaking of the free market, I'm really interested, Carl and Chris, to get your reaction, I think, to a lot of that. But Ryan, before that, I mean, obviously, the new administration, has expressed an interest now, I think, in overhauling this program. And we've seen a number of developments recently, both at the legislative and the administrative level, pointing out that BEAD is going to go through some changes. What developments have we seen since late January and in general?
Yeah, and let me echo Veneeth's, thanks for being here today. So, since late January, the administration and Congress have been actively reevaluating the BEAD program. And so while the overarching goal of the program, expanding access for broadband to unserved and underserved areas, that remains unchanged. The path to getting there may be shifting. So at a high level, the focus may be shifting away from incorporating those broader social and economic initiatives in the program toward deregulation, cost efficiency, and technology neutral deployments. So what we should expect are some proposals targeting those requirements and preferences relating to affordability, prevailing wages, project labor agreements, union workforces, climate resilience, open access networks, and DEI initiatives. So that implementation, there's a lot of flux in between different constituencies. At the Commerce Department last week, we had this announcement from Lutnick that basically indicated that they were doing a rigorous review of the BEAD program, that they were going to be taking a technology neutral approach, but we don't really have any details yet. The Wall Street Journal did report, though, that this indicated there may be some additional funding that may be shifting from fiber based deployments to satellite and fixed wireless to the tunes of maybe multiple billions of dollars that might be shifting. And this might also indicate that states may need to be rewriting some of their plans on how they spend the funding, which also could impact implementation as well. But we don't have any details at the moment on what that could mean. So we're all just waiting to see. And then so we also did have the hearing last week in the House Communications and Technology Subcommittee where they were addressing some of these issues. And we saw that the chair of the committee, Richard Hudson, released a draft bill that is the Speed for BEAD Act. And so there we saw, in addition to, renaming the BEAD program, they were going to clarify certain technologies that could be used, clarifications on how funds could be used, providing more flexibility on, how projects could be selected, and eliminating some of those burdensome conditions I mentioned earlier. So more specifically on, like the brass tacks, one of the things that Republicans are looking at in detail is the high cost thresholds. And so under the BEAD NOFO, there's a requirement if you wanted to use alternative technologies, there's a threshold for extremely high costs per location. And so there, this is something that is defined currently at the state level. But if they were going to set ceilings, that could impact when you could use fiber versus could look at alternative technologies. And so the threshold right now is set at the state level, but if they wanted to set a ceiling, that might be something that NTIA is looking at, or Congress could implement as well. And so what that means is for the states, this may make it more difficult if they want to deploy fiber, but the high cost threshold is so low that you're basically forced to deploy another technology. Or maybe you are a state that wants to deploy an alternative technology, but you do not have the ability because the high cost threshold is high enough that it makes it more difficult to get there. And then so another big component here is on affordability as well. So under the law right now, the recipients of BEAD funding need to provide a low cost option. And so there as well, Republicans have treated this in some ways as like rate regulation, and have been, more concerned about how states could use this to impose additional obligations beyond what they think is appropriate under the law. And so there, they have been looking at ways to maybe eliminate that requirement and provide more flexibility. And again, this is particularly important for certain types of providers where the ongoing cost to deliver may be more expensive. And so this is something that's been flagged with respect to LEO constellations, for example, where it's pretty easy to exceed $100 a month or $150 a month for some of these plans. And so a low cost option becomes potentially more difficult, and it may affect their willingness to participate in the program. And then, so I wanted to call out two other tensions that we're seeing between different Republican constituencies. And so one of them we're broaching upon earlier, which is revamping at this point could also result in slowing down the process. And so you saw, for example, Senator Shelley Moore Capito in reacting to the Commerce announcement that she appreciated the interest in improving the program, but this could also delay West Virginia's deployment of this funding. And so there is a tension, I think, between the states and potentially federal Republicans and how how they want to modify the program. And then another big component here is what could be done with the excess proceeds. And so there, states are looking at potentially using excess proceeds for workforce development. The draft bill that was introduced last week, this was something that they did flag as something that could be used, but that we have sitting in the background budget reconciliation and the desired tax cuts, and so there is a desire to find funding in various locations. And so what they do with excess funding from the states after implementing is a big point of contention. So I'll pause there. Yeah.
It is a lot, and it's been a lot to consider. I'll add one more thing, actually, Ryan. And I saw this last night. Representative Allen has introduced the BEAD Fee Act, which I think is important. I think for a lot of builders here, states and political subdivisions would be required to be neutral on permitting and siting application fees, and make fees attributable only to actual and direct costs. So there's complementary legislation going through Congress right now, in addition to the Speed for BEAD Act as well. I'm excited to turn now to our industry experts here, Chris and Carl. I definitely want you to have an opportunity to talk a little bit more about your business models and how you've been thinking about this. Obviously, once the new administration completes its review of the BEAD program, and we get through some of that tension, I think that Ryan was talking about, the next steps will really be for states to work with and identify subgrantees, and some states are already well into that process. How have your companies been preparing for this moment, and do the proposed changes to the program resolve any of the concerns that we talked about at the INCOMPAS show back in October that you may have previously had with the program's requirements?
Thanks, Chris. Again, I'm Chris Champion, Vice President of Government Relations for Spire. We operate in the Southeast, mainly in Tennessee, Mississippi, and Alabama, with our headquarters in Jackson, Mississippi. The BEAD program is something we've been following for a long time, and we've had many debates within our company about how to move forward. So you can imagine getting in a room with the CFO, first getting in a room with the engineers and having this debate and the market development guys over should we participate in the BEAD program or not. I'm sure many of you have had those same discussions. We really had some success in the early stages of the ARPA programs with CARES Act funding that was given to Mississippi to deploy. We had some success in ARPA through the Capital Projects Fund, and we're able to deploy to serve a significant amount of homes both in Mississippi and Alabama with those funding opportunities. And so there was a lot of excitement within our company about the potential for BEAD. And then when some of the rules and regs came down, we hit the pause button on what that deployment was going to look like. But through the work of INCOMPAS and others, we really like what's come out of the Speed for BEAD Act and some of those potential reforms that could take place that would really make it more attractive for private companies like ourselves to deploy fiber. It really loosens some of the regulations, and really our CFOs and those in the finance world are more excited about the program and those potential changes than they ever have been. Now, what does the Speed for BEAD Act, is that a messaging bill to NTIA, say, hey, this is what Republicans on the Hill want to see? Or is this actually something that's going to pass through legislation over the next few months? My personal opinion is it's more of a messaging act, and that hopefully once we get the full team in place at NTIA, we'll move quickly to implement some of those initiatives that are in this Speed for BEAD Act, that can be made at the administration level and move forward, because there are a lot of states that are ready to go. As I told Veneeth on our call, as an Ole Miss fan, I don't always compliment things that happen in Baton Rouge. As a matter of fact, I've never have complimented anything in Baton Rouge. But the work that the Louisiana Broadband Office has done has been pretty remarkable. And the letter that Governor Landry sent to the Trump administration, I saw it and I said, amen. Let's do this as quick as possible. So from a provider perspective, at least for C-Spire, we like the changes that are coming, and we're okay with a little delay in the program with some of these changes that could be implemented.
These SEC rivalries are killing me up here. It's going to really bog down this panel. I appreciate you saying that, Chris, because one thing I wanted to mention, I'm not sure if we said it. If we have, I apologize. In the same way that Governor Landry did a letter on the BEAD program, we also saw Senator Cruz do one. The likelihood that Ariel Roth, who has been nominated to be the NTIA administrator, was involved in the writing of that letter, proposing some changes, I think was pretty high. And so the likelihood that she will engage in some of those administrative changes, I think, is also equally high. Carl.
Oh, Chris and Chip and Team INCOMPAS, thank you again for bringing us all together. I find so much value in the Policy Summit every year. As Chip mentioned, my name's Carl Guardino. I have the honor of serving as Vice President for Global Government Affairs at a pre-public company called Tarana Wireless. And I try not to be presumptuous that you've heard of a pre-public company. So Chris asked me to share just a little bit and then to comment on BEAD. 17 years ago, Three PhD students met at the university they were attending here in the United States, and they had a huge head for hard sciences and a big heart for people in unserved and underserved communities around the world. So they did their PhD thesis together. How do we help impoverished villagers in Ghana, in Africa, where none of them were from? Well, they got an A and they started a company, because that's what we do in America's innovation economy, right? So fast forward 17 years, those three PhDs are now 28 PhDs, 300 engineers, 425 employees, and one political science major. And just so proud to be part of a company that has made what we thought was impossible possible. And that's what we do with innovation in America. And the two big breakthroughs, that 30 patents, $425 million in privately funded research and development, they would not take a dime of government funds, produced was two big breakthroughs over traditional or legacy fixed wireless. By the way, we never put others down to lift ourselves up, so this is just data. But legacy fixed wireless doesn't have the ability consistently to do non-line of sight. Why is that important? 4 out of 5 of our families in the United States don't have the luxury of being direct line of sight between their home or business and a vertical asset. Whether that's a cell tower or a water tower or a grain tower or the top of a building, there's just not there. So being able to do non-line of sight is key. That's one. Two, the second, the PhDs were so excited to call me in on my 3rd day at the company and say, Carl, you got to tell people about asynchronous burst interference cancellation. I said, well, I read the material my first 3 days. You mean noise cancellation, right? Well, yeah. Well, can I just say that and be accurate? Well, I guess so. And they looked disappointed that I wasn't going to give this big forward. But what it is the ability, if Mike Sanders in Oklahoma is sitting there and I'm here and there's a bunch of conversations going on in ambient noise, it's the equivalent of nulling, not jamming, not being a bad neighbor, but nulling, quieting, so that Mike and I can still communicate, but so can you. And that is noise cancellation. Those two big breakthroughs are part of those 30 patents that allow us point to multi-point. One radio on a tower can go as far as 256 homes and businesses with 800 megabits per second in CBRS, 1.6 in 6 gigahertz. You heard that right. Sliced and diced, however, any of our 401 ISP partners around the world would like to slice and dice it. And that's why in 3 years, only 3 years since we first deployed, and that first deployment was in Ghana, as promised, we're in 24 countries, 47 of the 50 states, 3 of the 5 US territories, 1 of every 10 counties in the United States with more than 20 million homes passed. Because that's what happens in America when we innovate and make the impossible possible. On BEAD, you know, in Silicon Valley, where I've had the pleasure, I was the CEO for 24 years and have been in the Valley doing policy work for 3.5 decades. There are 2 trains of thought that get companies in trouble. One is an approach that people say with pride, well, we rush things out, we break things. Ready, fire, aim. And then there's those who say, we're going to be really careful. Ready, aim, 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 and they never fire. Let's get back to just ready, aim, fire. There was a reason. Thanks, Dad. You know, there was a reason that members of the GOP and the House Energy and Commerce Committee a few years ago said, "Ooh, let's hold up. We got to have better maps. If we're going to invest all this money, we got to be aiming for a target with good maps." That was a ready, aim. And then there are others saying, no, we got to get it out really quickly. That's ready, fire. Let's find that common ground where we're not slowing down Veneeth. We're not slowing down the great work that Director Sanders and his CSO Eden Rolls and his tribal leader MJ Barton are doing in Oklahoma, that we're going to be able to keep these states on track, because the digital divide is now. If we're going to wait another 2, 3, 5, 7 years, we failed another generation of families and kids, and that's not right. I'm going to stop there. A lot more comments, but thanks for the opportunity.
It's so funny that, I mean, the panel is about BEAD and USF, and I'm going to end up spending about 20% of our time talking about USF. I'm going to combine the rest of our BEAD questions to the panel. We've got some proposed changes now. Some concrete examples of what the proposed changes could be. INCOMPAS, when BEAD was being developed, obviously was a proponent of this fiber preference that NTIA installed in the program, and now we see a more tech neutral approach. The changes themselves, the tech neutral approach, how are you all sort of handling that in the state? How are you talking to your clients about that? And then how do we make sure that we get future-proof, scalable networks, to these communities, these pockets of communities that I mentioned earlier that do not have service and will need the sort of future-proof capabilities that will come with 5G, 6G, quantum computing, AI, all of these use cases that are going to be coming down the road. Veneeth, let me start with you.
Yeah, first of all, folks, Chris, I love Mississippi, all right? My parents spent their first 10 years in Mississippi, which were critical. So other than when LSU plays Ole Miss, then that's when I don't like Mississippi or Mississippi State.
Ryan and I don't feel safe sitting between.
That's right. That's right. Look, folks, in Louisiana, we're tech neutral. We had an allocation of $1.35 billion. We could have wired every single one of our locations with fiber. We could have wired every single one of the locations with fiber and buried it 50 million feet underground. But we didn't do that. Okay. What's really important for us, and I think this is something that's sometimes glossed over, is the concept of universal coverage. How do we ensure that every single, in this case, Louisiana or American, actually has access to internet? Because I get a ton of constituent calls every day. Mike gets a ton of constituent calls every day. And I'm happy to forward all those constituent calls to y'all, okay? So you can answer them. I'm sure Mike would. But the question I get asked every day is, when am I going to get internet? And not only when am I going to get internet, how soon can I get it? And then if not how soon, then how resilient? Those are the three fundamental questions that we have to ask ourselves. And so part of the rationale why, for us, tech neutrality is important, and why the governor a couple of months ago, when he sent in his letter, talked about LEO as reliable internet service, is because what we effectively want is that every state has the ability to toggle up, toggle down, that mix of technology that's going to be critical to achieving universal coverage. Because some states may feel they're shortchanged. Some states may feel shortchanged because of their design of their grant program, or because of, I got to get fiber to every single one of those locations. What we're effectively saying is, let's give the state directors, where most, if not all, the execution risk will really resolve and reside. Let's give them as many tools as possible so that they make the decisions that's in their best interest for their people in terms of achieving universal coverage. So that's really important. The last thing I'm going to say, especially in Louisiana, we made a conscious decision to invest a lot in fiber. After President Trump got elected, Governor Landry made a seminal announcement. I know INCOMPAS is focused on AI now quite a bit, but Meta announced the largest hyperscale AI data center project in the world. It's a $10 billion investment in Northeast Louisiana, 4.3 million square feet, which I think Mark Zuckerberg posted on Meta on Facebook. I think it's like a third of the size of Manhattan. It's massive. Huge win for the president, huge win for Governor Landry. And if you were to draw within a 5 to 10 mile circumference of that facility, how many BEAD eligible locations exist? It's close to 700 plus households and small businesses. who we've awarded BEAD dollars to a local company to build fiber connectivity to those locations. So imagine the awesome opportunity for folks in that part of the state, which is a relatively poor part of the state, that's not only going to have fiber driven to it by a local company, but now you've got this massive AI data center. And so I just think when it comes to workforce development, the use of, and I might slightly disagree with using funds only for broadband infrastructure. It is critical for a state's, for a country's competitive ability, given the global nature of competition, that we use broadband as an asset or a platform or enabler to drive economic growth, competitiveness in places like Louisiana. If we do that, we increase the labor force participation rate, we get people healthier. And so from our angle of attack, we plan, and the governor's priorities is to use a lot of these dollars, some of these non-deployment dollars on workforce development as it relates to AI, as it relates to reinvesting in our 2-year colleges, 4-year colleges, et cetera, and creating jobs for now and in the future.
Are you green, Carl?
I want to build on something that Veneeth just emphasized.
Oh, there it is. That's it. It's working now.
Is it working?
I thought it was.
Thank you. I want to build on something Veneeth just emphasized. I worked my way through college doing construction, and we learned really quickly, use the right tool for the job. And many times, fiber is absolutely going to be the right medium, and it's a great medium. Use it wherever you can in a even somewhat cost-effective and time-efficient way. And that's coming from a fixed wireless access technology company. At the same time, I like to call myself frugal. My wife calls me cheap. And I'm especially cheap with taxpayers' hard-earned dollars. And we want to leverage limited funds, recognizing that finances are finite. Because remember the North Star, every single unserved and underserved American family. And we will have failed in what was called a once-in-a-generation opportunity if we don't achieve the goal. So pick the right tool for the job, as Veneeth did in Louisiana, as Director Sanders and his team are doing in Oklahoma, so that we get to the goal. But here's what we have to emphasize, because it's not just any technology. It's technologies that meet the standards in the law. We call it the 4 legs of the table. Doesn't do us much good if you're a family if you can't afford it. So how are you going to make it affordable? But in the laws also, it's reliable. That's 24/7, 365, not sometimes. That doesn't help my kids in school. It's got to be high speeds on both the downlink and the uplink, and the minimum should be the 100 by 20 foundation. And it's got to have a latency that's under 100 milliseconds. If we haven't achieved those 4 items, and that should be the bar for every technology being considered with taxpayer funds to achieve, because if we haven't, we're failing American families.
Ryan, how are your clients thinking about this?
Yeah, so I'll speak more generally rather with respect to particular programs or companies. So I would say just very briefly, the increasing flexibility in the program should increase provider participation in the program. So if they're decreasing those requirements with respect to labor, climate, DEI, we should expect that there might be more provider participation in the program. If they do, increase flexibility with respect to the deployment of technologies, that should also increase, participation as well. And so there's this question about whether there may be, ceilings on, how much a state could spend on a certain technology as well. It remains to be seen. But Lutnick in his statement did mention that they wanted to use the quote unquote lowest cost option, and how prescriptive they're going to be about that sort of requirement. Could reduce some flexibility, but that remains to be seen. But I think that the general trajectory is towards more flexibility, which I think means more competition.
And that's good news, I think, for states trying to drive these programs as far as possible. Chris?
Yep. So for C Spire, we operate a cable network, a fixed wireless network, a mobile wireless network across the entire state, and we also have a fiber network across our footprint. So when we look, we're always a fiber first company. We want to build fiber as that first technology, but we understand it's not always economical. So I doubt any of you have ever tried to build fiber to a duck camp in the middle of the Mississippi River. But it's not easy to do, and to get the permits to do that is pretty much impossible these days. And with if any of you duck hunters in the room, there's not many ducks in Mississippi anymore like there used to be. So when you take the kid to duck camp, they want to be able to access YouTube and play Fortnite and do all those other things aside from going hunting. And so what is that technology to get there? And so we look at all the different options that we have. And so for that particular instance, we start with the fixed wireless product. And we recognize that satellite is going to be needed to serve some of these areas as well. And so we're not afraid to compete with them and should accept the fact that they're going to be part of the whole spectrum of services that are going to get funding here and going to be needed to serve those random places. There's many places in Louisiana and the Bayou and others that are just impossible to get to with fiber. And so that technology is going to be needed.
We're going to spend 6% of our time talking about USF. Quickly, right down the row. How do we coordinate? Obviously, USF is a big pile of money that has been used for universal service. I think in light of the amount of investment that Congress has made, it bears taking a look at what kind of requirements we will have for USF moving forward. How do we coordinate these two? Are there any kind of reforms that are needed? Anyone have thoughts?
Sure, I'll just start. From our perspective, we believe that USF and BEAD need to work together. If you look at the 5G fund, which the FCC passed last August, there were certain the now chairman advocated that we wait for BEAD to be funded before we implement the 5G fund. The 5G fund is a $9 billion program that was passed by the FCC to help spread 5G across the country. That real cost is probably about $20 billion. But if you factor in the $42.5 billion from BEAD, that gets fiber in the ground to a lot of rural places across the country that need 5G services. And so obviously fiber in the ground, using the BEAD program to do that lowers the cost to implement the 5G fund. And so we agree with the chairman waiting on BEAD before 5G fund is implemented. And these two programs can work together to advance both fiber and 5G across the country.
Does anyone want the last word? We are at time. Carl, 1 minute.
That's pressure. USF, yes. Go to the INCOMPAS or Shelby or CCA websites. We have to get this right. Millions of American families are not as financially fortunate as pretty much all of us in this room, and they're depending on us in Congress and the courts to get USF right. My final thought is, hey, I want to end with an invitation. Director Sanders, Director Iyengar, others, Ana Gomez on the commission have come out to deployments to actually kick the tires on our technologies, sit down with families who have benefited from it. If you would like to come out to a real deployment and test Tarana technology, we would love to have you. And I promise you, it will knock your socks off. So I will be giving you socks if you want to speak with me later about it.
Please join me in thanking our panelists.